Hello everybody, we're going to be diagnosing this. Alright, so let's start off. Customer brings in an early 1900s Winchester 1892 that is recently inherited. He states that his father's gun cabinet for 50 years, so expect dust, debris, and old oil to essentially crystallize inside the weapon right off the bat. And he cannot remember the last time he saw his father take it out. So, besides a little surface rust, the rifle appears to be in fairly good working condition. The customer complains that the rifle is not feeding when he charges the action. He claims that he can get it to work once in a while, but not constantly. He only attempted one type of ammunition that he found in the drawer of his father's gun cabinet. He has not fired the rifle since inheriting it. He only tried cycling the ammunition. Alright, so we just got to figure out if the ammunition is corresponding with that, just to make sure he's not trying to load something too big or too small into there. That's a common trend. Let me find my mouse cursor. Alright, so safety. How would we prep this weapon to be in a safe condition for us to be manipulating it and moving it around the shop? So, since it is a lever action, it's going to be slightly wonky compared to most modernized weapons. So, obviously, we're going to attempt to charge the action and see if we have any visual indicators of rounds being inside the chamber, the breech, or inside the tubular magazine that runs parallel under the barrel. After that, we are going to attempt to visually inspect to make sure there is no rounds inside the tube, inside the chamber, on the lifter, on the feed tray, or anywhere within the action. After this, we are going to ensure that that hammer is safely and dropped controllably, so that way, if there is problems with the sear or something while we are testing it, we do not have a negligent discharge of an unforeseen problem, therefore in the future. Alright, cool. Initial inspection and diagnosis. What action type is the firearm in question? Well, let's take a gander up over here on the lovely internet. Alright, let's put Winchester. 19, it was a 95, correct? Let's check. 1992. Okie dokie. 1992. Let's go to images, just to ensure. It is a lever action repeating rifle. Alright. What is the most likely type of failure? It would probably be a failure to feed in this case. Because he is having difficulties of those rounds entering the chamber, it will be a failure to feed. Short stroking would be when if we go up over here, we're going to use this Winchester 1973 as an example. So let's slow her down nice and slow so we can catch this. Alright, let's fire. Alright, so the cycling of the lever, if we acknowledge that the shooter, after the firing of the weapon, goes to cock it. Now, if we go into X-ray mode, we can see that we have our good old beloved bolt here. Let me just use this. Alright, so we have our breech block, and then we have our extractor and our general assembly to operate that. So, short stroking is when, let's say, the shooter goes to pull it back, he sees that the round is extracting just out of pure luck, and then he just slides it back in. He doesn't allow that weapon to go through its full cycle of operations because he is trying to rush his or herself, or some of the linkage is out of time or out of sync, or there's something loose and wonky. So make sure, if you are operating your lever action or pump action, which is a common trend, you're allowing it to go to its full stop before you're bringing it back. Otherwise, you're just going to chamber that empty cartridge that you have just shot. Short stroking could be the cause of this problem, but yet again, this is something that you visually have to see, such as it's Like, let's say someone brings in a 30-30, or in this case, a good old 22. You can take some 22 snap caps, load that up in there, and I'd just be like, hey, cycle the action. Let me just see what you're talking about here. And then we can evaluate if the owner of the weapon is short stroking and it's their fault for being an idiot, or if there is something with the weapon that is wrong. But prominently, it could be short stroking. After verifying that the firearm is in safe prior condition to disassembly, are there any tests that I could perform? If so, what could be the hopes of that performance? Well, like I just said, grab possibly some snap caps, and if you want to be cheeky, some spent 22 brass, and have it cycle to see where those are getting caught up. If they're getting caught up in spots that they should be getting caught up for that case, cool, awesome. You verify the wrongs, and for those properly shaped and headspace snap caps, cool. You can verify if they're getting caught up on something because someone decided to brazen or solder something because they saw it on the internet, or something's getting filed down and it's not catching where it needs to be. Details that what single component would I suspect would be the malfunction? If it is failing to chamber, it could possibly be the lifter. It's the only thing that's aligning that to be with the breech block to allow it to chamber. So that could be dented or mild. Otherwise, it could be a corresponding spring or piece under there that could be messed up, but most likely that. After completing the prepare, will I perform any tests? Yes, absolutely I would. I would load up the tubular magazine and cycle it to completion. And as thus, I always believe that any good gunsmith should shoot and test the weapon before they hand it over to the customer, because you could be receiving a gun, but you also could be returning essentially a pipe bomb that goes off next to your customer's face. And having pieces of metal in your customer's face is bad for business. Assuming a worn lever is the cause of the malfunction, in a short customer summary, describe the type of failure. So I would go in and be like, hey Tom, this is Doc from Doc's Pawn and Guns. Hey, I figured out what was wrong with your lever action. The lever happened to be worn, which did not allow it to properly cycle and move the pieces where it needed to be. Replaced it, got a new one, slapped in there, and she's working like the day she came out of the factory. List any additional resources. You guys seen the resources I used. Alright. The Winchester had a badly worn firing pin and would not have fired if he had tried. Use the answers from part 1 to respond to the following prompt. Note, please do not go back and change your answers to part 1. We are looking for evidence of your thoughts, processes, not correct or incorrect answers. Cool, awesome. Alright, I'm going to stop this here. Alright, now we're back to it. So, at what point in the previous section did you perform a test fire? So I performed the test fire after I've done my repairs and tests to ensure that I did not turn a gun into a pipe bomb. Alright, and it also prevents liability on the gunsmith's or armorer's end, because it's like, I shot it here with factory proof loads and official ammunition, didn't blow up in my face. Whatever you put in there was wrong, and you did that wrong. Here's the documentation and evidence to show that I am not liable by your negligence. Make sure you're always covering up your back with paperwork, especially when it involves things that like to go boom or bang or snap. All right. Based on my own answers of post-inspection and repair of question 2, would you have discovered the worn firing pin during my diagnosis? So I would have done an initial field strip, and obviously with an initial field strip or prep to clean, I would visually and physically inspect for worn parts, burrs, embers, remaining brass, or areas of wear and tear that should not be present. Most likely I would have came across the worn firing pin, acknowledged, wrote that down into my notes of the firearm, called the owner of it and been like, hey, you know that, are you tracking on the fact that your firing pin is also for awry? Would you also like me to add that to the repairs, or would you like me to just bypass and to proceed to work with your failure to load problem? I lost my mouse cursor. Alright, so if the firing pin in the firearm needed replacement, where might I find the actual replacement part? So me personally, I always like to go to Midway USA, and luckily I went ahead and found it, and Midway USA is selling this part, which I need, for $28.49 plus shipping and handling. There's the URL if anyone needs this part for future references. So let's go over to part 3. The customer brought in a Winchester model 1897. It's clean and well oiled, but very worn. Obviously, it's expected from a 120-something year old gun. All right, cool, very good model, very trustworthy weapon. The predecessor to the notorious trench shotgun. All right, so how would I safely, or sorry, my apologies, let's go into the problem here. The customer explains that when the action is worked, the hammer does not stay back. It simply moves forward with the action. Hammer follow. All right, that's a common term, or you're outrunning the action. All right. You confirm this by attempting to replicate the problem. All right, so how would I safely clear the weapon? I would pump the weapon or charge it, visually inspect to ensure that the chamber is empty, and also cant the weapon over and visually inspect that there is no rounds inside the magazine tube. All right, I would slowly, while maintaining positive control of the hammer, return it forward, slowly drop that hammer, because that hammer is not going to want to stay there. All right, so what action type is this? This is a pump action shotgun. All right, yes, the hammer should stay back when the weapon is cocked, because it runs off of the fact that the hammer is cocked and the hammer spring provides the force of the hammer to strike the firing pin to dent the primer. Is this failure mechanical in nature, or is it due to poor ammunition? This problem is due to a mechanical failure of having a worn hammer sear, all right, or a hammer spring. One of those two could be the culprit. What is the most likely type of failure? This will be a failure to cock. The reason because is the weapon cannot properly cock to prepare to fire the weapon. It's properly feeding, it's properly chambering, so you're going to have that failure to cock and failure to fire malfunctions. All right. Detail assembly. What single component would you most likely suspect to be the problem? That hammer sear, or that hammer spring, or that hammer notch? Whatever would so whichever part would actually be putting tension or storing and stopping that implement or component or assembly from allowing it to properly work as necessary would most likely be worn, broken, or not installed correctly. What procedures might I perform to verify my assumptions with that? Well, I priorly did this. I would also use snap caps and attempt to see if the problem is remedied by ammunition. There might have been some aftermarket contraption or whatever to counteract that. Someone just had a problem with dropping that hammer, and that could have been that. But if the problem is still ensuing when I'm using snap caps in my test, then that will verify my assumptions of that hammer spring, hammer notch, or one of those components directed to locking that hammer to the rear. Post-inspection and repair. Assuming it is a worn hammer notch. Ironic. Where the notch of the malfunction is a short customer summary. Describe the type of failure. All right, so call up the customer, be like, hey, Tom, Dick, and Harry, This is Doc from Doc's Pawn Guns. I've discovered what's wrong with your good old shotgun here. It is due to a worn hammer notch. That is the piece that is a slight groove that indexes onto another piece that allows the hammer to stay where it is. When the trigger is pressed, it frees up that space and allows the hammer to fall. I'd explain that. If they have any other questions, they'd obviously ask, and I'd be able to sit there and give them a good old history lesson on how things work. You guys already seen any form of resource or information that I have in front of me. Hope you guys have a nice day. Goodbye, and always remember, treat every weapon as if it were loaded. Never point your weapon at anything not intended to shoot. Keep your fingers straight and off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Keep your weapon on safe until you intend to fire. No target lies beyond and in between. Hope you guys have a nice day, and goodbye.
Welcome to Dan Doc's channel.